We have another topic. Squad member Congresswoman Ilhan Omar turning heads while campaigning for Bernie Sanders this weekend. What?
I am beyond honored and excited for a president who will fight against Western imperialism and fight for a just world.
Greg, what kind of world is she thinking about?
Oh, when I hear her, I just say, oh, brother. Anyway. They were talking about, Bernie Sanders was talking about imperialism, right?
Yeah.
He's talking about imperialism. So you realize his socialist heart isn't really in Sweden or Denmark. It's in the old Soviet bloc and Cuba. We love him as an adorable, cranky Muppet, but his ideas are kind of destructive. And when you accuse anybody of you don't love America, when they are talking about America as some kind of Western imperialistic mess, there's a valid point to be made there.
And that they can't wait to see America fundamentally changed.
Well, I would say that the real Western imperialists were the French and the British, who really screwed up the entire map. If you look at the Middle East, they're the ones that drew all those lines that we're now defending. Come on, British.
Way to take it to the Brits.
Seriously.
We
were an imperialist nation.
In the
America
commercial
wasn't.
break, I can't wait to hear any thoughts on this.
People are right now in Venezuela buying gas with cigarettes. It's ridiculous, and this is why people laugh at him as eventually being the mainstream candidate. When you throw around that Western it's never going to happen. And her saying it's never been further away than in my lifetime or whatever, refugee to Congress.
But they did have a big crowd.
It just happened.
Yeah.
Well, I just it's.
Oh boy, we have a lot to unpack here. Fox News just is really irritating in some ways because you never really know if the reporters are just really naive or they're just promoting propaganda on purpose. It's kind of tricky, but when they're talking about immigration, I'm pretty sure that they're trying to promote propaganda. In this case, they just don't know what they're talking about. It seems like they actually believe what they're saying. So, first I want to talk about the last point that they made, which was when the final reporter, or rather host, said, oh, you have Bernie Sanders who the media is trying to prop up and, he's just not working. So, two reasons why it's ridiculous, alright? A, the media is not trying to prop him up. Let me ask you a question. Show me some way that the media is trying to prop up Bernie Sanders. Go ahead, you may have the floor. You can't say anything, right? Because the media isn't trying to prop him up. Because, for example, there was a story with CNN where after he had a heart attack, CNN filmed him in an interview, and they basically made his face more saturated in red, so his face looked pink. Then they're talking about his age and how he's old and white. So that's just one example. And then you have MSNBC. You have CNN. I'm going to go back to them. Who was propping up Kamala Harris for a long time, then briefly Beto O'Rourke, and now Pete Buttigieg. You have MSNBC, who's basically propping up Joe Biden and has been the whole time. So there's no official mainstream media site that's actually propping up Bernie Sanders. My second point is, what do you mean that the whole entire propping up Bernie Sanders isn't working with the people, it isn't working out? Actually it is, because Medicare for All polls at 70%. The 70% wealth tax polls at 59%. Free college polls at 60%. On and on and on and on. Oh, and the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal polls in the early 80s. The most popular progressive policy. So, she's been debunked. Get aside. Please just go away, because what you're saying is ridiculous. The media is trying to prop up Bernie Sanders and they're failing. And then the other point, which was made by Greg Gutfeld, who I just really don't like saying his name. He said, oh, Bernie Sanders' policies and beliefs go back to the Soviet era and, the Cuba era. And I'm like, did you just indirectly accuse Bernie Sanders of being a communist? And this is why Fox News just isn't a reliable source, because they just basically called him a communist. They said, oh, his policies aren't of Sweden or Denmark, they're of Soviet Russia, or rather, the Soviet era. Doesn't matter either way, he said the same thing. So, it just doesn't make sense. Bernie Sanders is not a communist. First of all, you can say, okay, well, he didn't say he's communist, he didn't say it, but maybe he's lying. But then his policies aren't communist either. There's nothing in his policies that are communist. Go ahead, Mr. Gutfeld, who, by the way, off topic, but for some reason, my mom and I was pointing this out, is like he thinks he's funny in a way that he will just make all the other Fox News hosts laugh, but nobody else is laughing, not even me. So he called Bernie Sanders a communist, and okay, communism believes that the government should control all property, so we're gonna have government Starbucks, basically government coffee, and they believe that everybody should make the same amount of money. Bernie Sanders is not in favor of that. Bernie Sanders just wants to get, this is the upper class, this is the working class. Bernie wants to do this. He doesn't want to make it just like that. And he isn't saying that you don't get to choose a job, and when that job that you get, you have it for the rest of your life. You can't switch. He isn't saying that. He isn't saying that everybody has to make the same amount of money. He isn't saying that all property is owned by the government. Oh my god. It's ridiculous. The whole entire Bernie Sanders is communist thing. Oh my gosh. And also the Venezuela point. See, I could technically make 2 parts to this video. The whole Venezuela point, where she was saying, oh, she didn't directly say Bernie wants to make us, like Venezuela, but she said, just like in Venezuela, in order to buy gas, they have to use cigarettes as money. She brought that up in the conversation about Bernie Sanders. So, she's obviously just trying to compare him to Venezuela. And look, with Venezuela, it was just pure socialism. With Bernie Sanders, he is a social democrat or a democratic socialist, whichever way you choose. So, again, this is what I noticed. I noticed that Republicans, again, always tend to smear Democrats in a way, especially progressive Democrats. They smear them in a very lazy way and they just lie about what they're for. Bernie Sanders is not a communist. He's a democratic socialist, not even a pure socialist. So ridiculous. Oh, and the last point, the whole entire regime change war point, the whole entire Western imperialism point, which is probably the essential argument. Here's the crazy part about that. They're saying, oh, obviously, she hates America, Bernie hates America because they're calling the United States a Western imperialist country. I'm sorry, but it kind of is. Because, the United States is staying in Afghanistan. I love my country, but I can criticize it. This is the problem with the Republicans. They refuse to criticize their party, and they refuse to criticize their country. With me, I can criticize anybody. I can criticize my party or my country. And I'm willing to criticize my country on the basis of them being a Western imperialist state. They're staying in Afghanistan. We've been there for over 17 years. The majority of Americans don't even want to stay there anymore. They want to get out. Now, for a while, we were in Syria. And we withdrawn troops from Syria, but now we're going to Iraq. So we have troops in so many other countries. Not necessarily in warfare, but we have troops stationed in their countries. I don't even have to elaborate. It's calling the United States, refusing to call the United States a Western imperialist country, nation. It's just ridiculous. The whole notion of that doesn't make any sense. Now, the last point, and you can tell I'm very frustrated. I'm not happy in this video. The last point is when this guy with the black hair, I don't know his name, basically said, oh, you want to blame the U.S.? No, you have to blame, Britain and France. Another thing Republicans do, they tried to get off topic. So, because he didn't want to admit the United States as imperialist, he just wanted to blame other countries. And yes, Britain and France did do terrible things in the past. They divided up countries. Yet France was in charge of Western France. Whoa. You had France, who was in charge of Western Africa. Great Britain, who was in charge of Eastern and Southern Africa. And then you had Belgium and Germany and Spain and Portugal all over Africa. They did bad things. But how's that supposed to disprove the U.S. did bad things too? It doesn't make sense. It's like saying, oh yeah, you know what? I broke that toy, but, he also broke a toy. You aren't helping yourself. You aren't helping anybody. Nobody's benefiting. You're not destroying anybody in that argument. So, yeah, France and Britain and more countries from Europe did terrible things. But at least they don't have troops in so many other allied countries. At least they don't have troops that are stationed in so many countries that we all want to leave. Even if they were imperialist nations, doesn't mean that we aren't. We could all be imperialist nations. So again, even if those countries are imperialist, which they are not, even if that were the case, that doesn't mean the U.S. isn't. And this is why not to trust Fox News as your most reliable source. It's just, my goodness. I could have made 2 parts of this video because it's just so ridiculous. Well, thank you for watching this video, guys. See you guys later, and bye.